Are you ready for the Word?
Yes, sir.
Good deal. You know, for the last few years, we have been meeting on this night. We've used this to always receive, partake of the bread and of the wine, where He said, "This is my body, which is broken for you, and this is my blood, which is shed for you." We've been doing that for several years, and tonight we're going to continue in that line, and I'm going to read out of 1 Corinthians chapter 11. If you do have your Bible, turn there. For the last 2 weeks, I have not been able to get away from this passage. It just keeps coming up in my spirit over and over again, particularly the first verse that we're going to read, but then also the rest of it. I do want to share with you what I believe has been communicated to me already through this passage. So look in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and I'm going to begin reading there in verse 23. "For I have received of Yahweh that which also I delivered unto you, that the Master Yeshua, the same night in which He was betrayed, took bread." We're going to look at the rest of what Paul had to say later. But first I want us to deal with that one phrase, the same night in which He was betrayed. Paul could have identified that night in a multitude of ways. He could have said on the first evening of Passover. He could have said the 14th day of the first month. He could have said the night the Messiah was arrested. He could have said the night before Messiah was slain. He could have identified that night in a multitude of ways, and yet He identifies the night He will be talking about in this way. He said it was the same night in which Messiah was betrayed. He's wanting to communicate something to us very distinctly. Betrayed is a strong word. And that's what kept coming up over the last 2 weeks, is that word betrayed. It is a very strong word. You know, what Peter did was serious, but it was not betrayal. Peter denied Messiah. The word that's translated as denied means to contradict. 3 times somebody came up to Peter and they said to him, "You're one of this man's disciples." And 3 times Peter contradicted them. 3 times Peter told them, "You're wrong." That's what denial is. It is to contradict somebody. It's to deny that what they're saying is true. Peter denied the Messiah, and that's serious. But it's not betrayal. Judas betrayed Him. And that act was so horrendous that it's mentioned at least 24 times in the Bible. I was shocked when I went back and went to looking at it. 24 times that I found that what Judas did was mentioned. Judas's betrayal is talked about. It is so horrendous and unimaginable that anyone could do such a thing that Paul used that very act of betrayal as the identifier of the night that he'd talk about. He said the same night in which He was betrayed. I'm going to come back to 1 Corinthians 11 in a moment, but first I want to go to the Bible and look at a few things. 24 times it talks about betrayal. I want to look at just a few of them, beginning in Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10 verse 1 says this, "And when He had called unto Him His 12 disciples, He gave them power," or another word there would be authority. "He gave them power against unclean spirits to cast them out, and to heal all manner of sickness and all manner of disease. Now the name of the 12 apostles are these: the first, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the publican, James the son of Alphaeus, and Lebbaeus, whose surname was Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed Him." Did you notice what it said in verse 1? Look at that. To the 12 he gave power against unclean spirits, to cast them out and to heal all manner of sickness and all manner of disease. Judas was included in the 12. The power to heal all kind of sicknesses and all kind of diseases and the power to cast out demons flowed through Judas. Have any of you ever heard Judas's name mentioned with healing and casting out demons? But yet it says right there that he did. But he's not known for any of that, none of it, because his life gets summed up in verse 4. When people talk about Judas, they don't talk about him healing the sick and casting out demons. When people talk about Judas, they talk about the fact that he is the one who betrayed Messiah. He was endued with power by Messiah to cast out demons and to heal the sick, but none of that matters. Why? Because of the also there in that verse. Because of the also. Who also, see, he cast out demons, he healed the sick, but he also betrayed the Messiah. So nothing else that he did in his life mattered. Everything else that he did in his life was negated because of that one also. Look at Matthew 17, verse 22. And while they abode in Galilee, Yeshua said unto them, the Son of Man shall be betrayed into the hands of men. They shall kill him, and the third day he shall be raised again. And they were exceeding sorry. Now when Messiah is foretelling and looking toward the day that he is going to be the Lamb of Yahweh that takes away the sin of the world, he could have said, we're going there and I'm going to be arrested and I'll be tried and I will be nailed to a stake. He could have said that, but he didn't. He saw it and he spoke of the act of betrayal that would lead to his arrest. That's significant. Matthew 20, verse 17. And Yeshua going up to Jerusalem took the 12 disciples apart in the way, and he said unto them, Behold, we go up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man shall be betrayed unto the chief priests and unto the scribes, and they shall condemn him to death. And they shall deliver him to the Gentiles to mock and to scourge and to crucify, and the third day he shall rise again. So I want you to notice there in that passage that the Messiah spoke of those who were going to nail him to a stake. He talked about those that were going to scourge him and mock him. He talked about those that were going to deliver him into the hands of the Gentiles. He talked about those that were going to condemn him to death. And in that group of people, made up of corrupt chief priests, made up of wicked scribes, made up of heathenistic Gentiles, he speaks also of the one that will betray him. Judas, who was numbered among the 12, is now being numbered and spoken of in the same breath as chief priests, scribes, and heathenistic Gentiles. In verse 18, and this is a good place for us to talk about what the word betrayal means. In verse 18, he said that he would be betrayed unto the chief priests and scribes. In verse 19, he said the chief priests and scribes who would condemn him to death. In verse 18, he said that they would deliver him to the Gentiles. The word translated deliver in verse 19 is the same word translated betrayed in verse 18. Same word. So to betray literally means to deliver. Actually, it means to yield, or it means to surrender. The chief priest had the Messiah in their custody. They surrendered him over to the Roman government. They had him in their custody. They yielded him and delivered him to the Romans. What did Judas do? The same word is used about him. What did he do? Well, he knew the Messiah intimately. We've seen that. He was entrusted with great power. He had a relationship with the Messiah. He was trusted. He was loved by the Messiah. He surrendered all of that. He had everything that Peter had. He had everything that James and John had, but he surrendered it. He yielded that. He delivered that over unto the chief priests and the scribes. And the question that we have to answer is, why did he do it? I think there can only be two reasons: to buy and to sell. Let me explain what I mean by that. He was selling and he was buying. He sold out everything he had with Messiah for 30 pieces of silver. He requested it, he received it. He also used that opportunity, I believe, to try and buy acceptance from the powerful leadership of Judaism. It wasn't enough to be one of the 12 with a traveling minister that was persecuted and hated and run out of town. He thought it'd be better to be connected with that powerful leadership of Judaism. That's still the reason people betray Messiah today. They either are buying or selling or both. They either know that they can make more money by betraying the true Messiah of Scripture and preaching or believing in a Greek version of Him, or they know that if they are ever going to fit in with the powerful leadership of Christianity, they're going to have to be willing to betray the true Messiah of Scripture and preach or believe in the version of the Greek Messiah that the leadership of Christianity has told them they have to believe in. Or both. Betrayal occurs when a commitment to the true Messiah is viewed as costing too much, either in monetary gain or in acceptance by others. Let's look at that first one. Let's look at that last one first, the acceptance of others. If you're going to follow Messiah, if we are going to follow Messiah, we're going to have to forsake any desire to be accepted by others. Listen to this in John chapter 5. Messiah speaking said this. He said, "But I know you, that you have not the love of Yahweh in you." That's powerful. That's strong. That's bold. He said to them, "I know that you have not the love of Yahweh in you. I am come in my Father's name, and you receive me not. If another should come in his own name, him you will receive. How can you believe, which receive honor one of another, and seek not the honor that comes from Yahweh only? Do not think that I will accuse you to the Father. There is one that accuses you, even Moses, in whom you trust. For had you believed Moses, you would have believed me, for he wrote of me. But if you believe not his writings, how shall you believe my words?" Come on now, think about that. All the people who are telling you that Torah doesn't matter anymore, all the people out there who are saying that all of that stuff passed away, Messiah said, if you don't believe what Moses wrote, you can't believe what I said. I want you to focus though on what was said in verse 44. In verse 44, Messiah said this. Messiah said that the hindrance, the roadblock, the thing that prevented those people from believing Him was their necessity for receiving honor from other men. They so desired to be honored by others, they could not concentrate on seeking to be honored by Yahweh Himself. So many people have this huge need to be accepted by those who they deem to matter in some way, they have such a strong need for that need supersedes their desire to be accepted by Yahweh. It hinders people from believing Messiah. They will ignore what they will ignore what Moses said, and they will ignore what Messiah said. They will reject Moses' writings, and they reject Messiah's words if it is necessary to do so in order for them to fit in with those whom they deem more important than Yahweh, whose honor they deem to be more important than Yahweh. Betrayal occurs when people have a need to be accepted. Betrayal also occurs when people have a desire for monetary gain. And by that I mean this: some people will surrender the real Messiah because they think that if they start following the real Messiah instead of his Greek counterpart, they will be thought odd, or they'll be thought Jewish, and that it might cost them a promotion, or it might cost them a job, and they're not willing to take that risk. And then there are the preachers whose God is their own bellies, who for covetousness' sake just out and out lie about who the true Messiah is. Peter said this about false teachers, and we need to mention it tonight in our time together. In 2 Peter 2:3, Peter said of false teachers, "And through covetousness shall they with vain words make merchandise of you." He's warning us about false teachers. So if he's warning us about false teachers, we should take time to figure out what he meant by that statement. If he's telling us how false teachers work, we should take the time to listen to this warning to understand how they work. And here's what he said about them: "Through covetousness shall they with vain words make merchandise of you." The word translated vain there means something that gets molded, it's artificial, it is fictitious. Covetousness, this particular word here, means more than the standard word for covetous. The standard word for covetous means to be eager for gain. But this word is stronger than that. This particular word here means to be so eager for gain that you'll use fraud to obtain it. It means to be so eager for gain that you will use artificial words. They use fictitious, made-up beliefs and doctrines. They mold their words into anything they need to mold them into in order to extort money out of their listeners. The doctrines they preach are love, but the doctrines they preach are molded for the sole purpose of committing fraud. And make no mistake about it, those who preach that way and those who choose to listen to them and those who choose to be colleagues with them at some time in their life, they have consciously chosen to surrender the real Messiah and to refuse to associate with him in order that they can embrace his false Greek counterpart. That's what betrayal is. Betrayal is a big deal. Let's read a little bit more about it. Matthew 26. "And it came to pass, when Yeshua had finished all these sayings, he said to his disciples, 'You know that after 2 days is the feast of the Passover, and the Son of Man is betrayed to be crucified.'" What I want you to see is that overshadowing the talk of his sacrifice, overshadowing the talk of his death, continues to be this talk of betrayal. It is so horrendous to surrender him. It is so horrendous that someone could know him and walk with him and be a part of what he is doing. It is so horrendous to consider that someone could have that opportunity and choose to surrender and yield that up for monetary gain or for acceptance. It's so horrendous that it continues to be mentioned over and over and over again when speaking of anything that moves toward the death, burial, and resurrection of the Messiah. At least 24 times it gets mentioned. I want to look at one more. Matthew 26:18. And Messiah said, Go into the city to such a man and say unto him, The Master says, My time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples. I got to pause right there before I go on. I'm going to change subjects for just a moment. But notice how the Messiah identified himself. He said, Say unto that man, the Master said, My time is at hand. This word master is not the word that refers to what you and I would think of as a master. Not in our Western society or our Western culture. This word literally is the word for instructor or teacher. Isn't that awesome? You know, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He said, I am the door. He said, I am the bread that came down from heaven. He said, I am the good shepherd. He identified himself in a number of ways, but when he sent the disciples to this man, I love the way he chose to identify himself. He said, Tell that man the teacher said. That just means a lot to me. The teacher said. Let's read on, verse 19. The disciples did as Yeshua had appointed them, and they made ready the Passover. Now when the even was come, he sat down with the 12, and as they did eat, he said, Verily I say unto you that one of you shall betray me. And they were exceeding sorrowful. Notice they didn't just, That word betrayal pierced their soul. It's a serious thing. They became exceeding sorrowful and began every one of them to say unto him, Master, is it me? And he answered and said, He that dips his hand with me in the dish, the same shall betray me. The Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe unto that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It had been good for that man if he had not been born. Then Judas, which betrayed him, answered and said, Master, is it I? And he said unto him, You have said. At least 4 times on the night in which he was betrayed, the word betrayed was used in dinner conversation. At least 4 times. And a warning is issued. Messiah said it would be better to not have been born than to be the one that betrays me. That betrayal is a serious thing. That makes betrayal a very serious thing. It is a serious matter to surrender a relationship with a true Messiah in an attempt to increase in some kind of financial or influential manner. It would have been better to have never been born. With that in mind, I'm going to go back to 1 Corinthians 11 and I'm going to wrap this up. 1 Corinthians 11 verse 23, For I have received of Yahweh that which also I delivered unto you, that the Master Yeshua, the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread. And when he had given thanks, he brake it and said, Take, eat. This is my body which is broken for you. This do in remembrance of me. After the same manner also he took the cup. When he had supped, saying, This cup is the New Testament in my blood. This do ye as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you do show the Master's death till he come. Wherefore, he said all that to make a point. Listen to his point. Wherefore, whosoever shall eat this bread and drink this cup of the Master unworthily shall be guilty of the body and the blood of the Master. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of that bread and drink of that cup. For he that eats and drinks unworthily eats and drinks damnation to himself, not discerning the Master's body. For this cause many are weak and sickly among you, and many sleep. Here's the point that we need to see. Betrayal is the greatest of offenses. There is no remedy for it. There is no remedy for choosing to surrender the opportunity to walk with the true Messiah. No remedy. Either we walk with Him or we don't. To those who choose to not walk with Him, He says to them, "Depart from me, you workers of iniquity, for I never knew you." There's no remedy for those that choose to not walk with Him. That's the price of betrayal. That's the price of following a Messiah who does not require you to keep Torah. If you choose a Greek Messiah instead of the real Messiah, there's a price to be paid. Betrayal is the greatest offense. But the message of 1 Corinthians 11 is, it's not the only offense that we're to be warned about in the time of Passover. We also need to be warned about the offense of participating in taking of the wine and the bread in an unworthy manner. That's a serious offense. It's actually very dangerous. Paul said this. Did you catch it? Paul said that taking of it in an unworthy manner is the cause of weakness, sickness, and death. Paul said many are weak, many are sick, and many have died because they ate and drank unworthily. We're living in an age where grace is preached in such a way that people no longer have a reverence for the holiness of Yahweh. We live in an age where grace is preached in such a way that people no longer have any fear of Yahweh. They no longer have any concern for the consequences of their transgressions of Yahweh's law. Yahweh's law is dismissed as being unrealistic. It's dismissed as being impossible to keep. How many of you ever heard that? Somebody say, well, nobody can keep it. It's dismissed as being unreasonable in its demands. Like Yahweh demanded something that was too hard and impossible. It's unreasonable to think that anybody could do it. His law is dismissed as being eliminated. It is dismissed as being a cause of bondage. And therefore, anybody who doesn't attempt to obey it, is considered to be a person of deep spiritual understanding in our day and time, and they are celebrated for walking as one who is liberated from the chains of obedience. Disobedience is considered by many to be the most obedient act that a person can perform in following the Messiah. What a deep, dark deception. No wonder the Bible speaks of reprobate minds, and no wonder the Bible speaks of darkened minds. Too often people take of the bread and the wine in an unworthy manner, and to do so is dangerous. So as we bring this evening to a close, we have to ask this question. Well, if it's so dangerous, what does it mean to do it in an unworthy manner? We would want to know, right? If doing it in an unworthy manner causes weakness, sickness, and death, we certainly should want to know what it means to do that. We don't want to do that. Well, those who teach a grace that never requires obedience say that this is not a reference to us being worthy. They say none are worthy. They say that this simply means that when we eat the bread and drink the wine, that we should do so with reverence, that we do so in a serious way. They say that the way it is consumed has to be worthy, not us. They say that the way it is consumed has to be worthy, but we do not have to be worthy. Well, that's absurd. We cannot make sure our actions are worthy without first making sure that we are worthy. There is no reverence for taking of the wine and the bread if it does not include an examination of our own hearts and of our own lives. We can stand with the most reverent posture in the world, But if we haven't examined our life, that posture means nothing. We may not be like Judas, who has surrendered a relationship with the true Messiah and has chosen a fake Greek Messiah to follow. But that's not the only issue at hand. The other issue being presented is partaking of the bread and wine in an unworthy manner is also serious. It's very important that we partake of the wine and partake of the bread in a worthy manner. So how do we do that? Well, let's look at these two verses in 1 Corinthians 11 again. Verse 29 and verse 31. Verse 29 says, "For he that eats and drinks unworthily eats and drinks damnation to himself, not discerning the master's body." And then in verse 31 he said, "For if we would judge ourselves, we should not be judged." I looked and looked and looked at verse 29, seeking to understand it. For I knew the key is that he that eats and drinks unworthily, that it's given us what the definition of what that means right there in verse 29. It means to not discern, as it said there's not discerning the master's body. So I sought to understand, what does that mean? I want to make sure I am discerning the master's body. The word discern there means to thoroughly separate. But what I couldn't wrap my mind around is, what does it mean to thoroughly separate the master's body? Not thoroughly separating the master's body. Let me first give you this illustration to understand that this word discerning means to separate. You remember in Romans 4 where it says that Abraham staggered not at the promises of Yahweh through unbelief? The word translated staggered is the same word translated discern here. What did it mean when it says Abraham staggered not at the promises of God through unbelief? It means Abraham did not thoroughly separate himself from the promises of Yahweh by not believing. He stayed connected to those promises by believing in them. When you don't believe in them, you thoroughly separate yourself from them. See that? Isn't that a powerful picture? Well, here, if we take that same understanding and come back here, it's talking about thoroughly separating, not thoroughly separating the master's body. And I look down in verse 31 and it says, "For if we would judge ourselves, we should not be judged." That first word translated judge there is the exact same word translated discern in the top. So if we would thoroughly separate ourselves, we should not be judged. Again, seeking to understand it, I couldn't make those two verses mesh. But then I found something that I think makes perfect sense, and I'm going to present that to you tonight with the understanding that I have far more studying to do. You see the word the Lord, the word Lord there in verse 29? In most manuscripts, that word is not there. It got added, even though it's not in italics there. In most manuscripts, that word is not there. What if it's correct? And I ask that with a great deal of humility. What if that is correct? Not discerning the body. It certainly makes it tie back in more cohesively to verse 31. Not thoroughly separating the body. For if we would thoroughly separate ourselves, we should not be judged. He that eats and drinks unworthily eats and drinks damnation to himself, not thoroughly separating the body. For if we would thoroughly separate ourselves, we would not be judged. Of doing this in an unworthy fashion simply means to not thoroughly separate the body. The time of communion is a time to make sure that we are not just following the true Messiah with some type of mental consent. It is a time to examine ourselves and make sure that we have thoroughly separated our bodies to Him. Remember, Paul said this, that we are to yield our members as instruments of righteousness. We're to yield every part of our body to Him as a member of righteousness. Is it not so that what Paul is telling us here is that as we take of the elements that represent what Messiah gave to us, His body, this is my body which is broken for you, this is my blood that is shed for you, does it not make sense that Paul is saying to us that we partake of those things with a mindset that says to Him, as you gave your body to me, so do I give my body for you. My very lifeblood, every part of my body, I dedicate it to you. For 2 weeks, I sense that that's what He's been saying to me. Don't take that bread and don't take that blood, that cup, and drink it. Don't take that bread and eat it in an unworthy fashion. Don't take it and eat the bread and drink the cup without there being a thorough commitment on your part of saying, everything I am is yours. Every way I live, I will live it to honor you. I guess what I'm saying to you tonight is the risk is too great to proceed in communion without a thorough understanding and examination of our lives. What I'm saying to you tonight is the reality of what Paul said there in 1 Corinthians 11 about weakness and sickness and death. The dangers of that are too great for me to service communion tonight. I'm not comfortable doing it. I know that's what we came for, but I'm not comfortable doing it. What I'd rather us do is to go home tonight and to contemplate what our Messiah went through on this night many years ago. And having loved His own, He loved them to the end. I want us to think about the commitment that He made to us and for us, knowing that the moment He gave up the ghost, that He would lift up His eyes in Hades. Simply with the faith that His Father would raise Him from the dead. I want us to go home and think about how that betrayal had to hurt when Judas found Him in the garden. If it wasn't so significant, it wouldn't have been mentioned 24 times. That had to hurt. I want us to think about what the scribes and the chief priests did to him in the early morning hours. And then what the Romans did to him later, and about being nailed to a stake. And then we should be able, with great confidence when we return, to say that if He died for us all, then all who live should live for Him, and I will dedicate my entire being to honoring Him. Passover, unleavened bread are very somber occasions. First fruits will celebrate the resurrection, but there are many things that we need to do between now and first fruits, internally. Let's commit ourselves to do those things, shall we? Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. As His name is put upon you, so shall He bless you. Hallelujah. You're dismissed.
You are so sweet. You are so sweet, and I sing for you. I sing for you. You are so strong. You are so strong, and I sing for you. Oh, I sing for you. And I sing for you. I sing for you. You are so good. You are so good, and I sing for you. I sing for you. You are here. You are here, and I sing for you. I sing.